Mother, just try to remember what day it is for the nice doctor. My son Mark's voice was smooth as honey, but his words were a slap. I sat on my own sofa, the one George and I picked out 30 years ago. The air smelled of the lemon polish I'd used on the end tables just that morning. The hum of the air conditioner was the only other sound in the room. Across from me, my daughter Susan nodded encouragingly. Next to her sat a man in a cheap suit they introduced as Dr. Klein. He had a soft, blank face and held a clipboard on his knee. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was something else. They thought I was losing my mind, and what was really at stake, I knew in that instant, was my freedom. Dr. Klein smiled a little too widely. "Eleanor," he said, like we were old friends, "can you tell me who the current president is?" "I can," I said, my voice steady. I told him the president's name. I also told him the vice president's name, just for good measure. "Very good. Now, can you count backward from 100 for me, by sevens?" I did it. 100, 93, 86. I didn't stumble once. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall as I spoke. When I finished, I looked right at him. A faint look of surprise crossed his face before he smoothed it away. Susan let out a long, theatrical sigh. "She has her good days, Doctor," she said, patting my hand. Her skin was cool. "It comes and goes." I pulled my hand away. I saw it then. This wasn't an evaluation. It was an ambush. They finally left, promising to call later. The house felt too quiet after they were gone. I went to plump the cushions on the sofa where they'd been sitting, a small act to erase their presence. That's when I saw it. Tucked beside the cushion was a thin manila folder. Dr. Klein must have forgotten it. My hands trembled a little as I picked it up. Inside were several pages clipped together. The top page had bold letters that made my blood run cold. Petition to appoint a guardian. I scanned the document, my eyes jumping from line to line. There was my name, Eleanor Vance. And then, under the section for proposed guardian, was my son's name, Mark Vance. The floor felt like it had dropped out from under me. This wasn't just a bad idea they were kicking around. This was real. The phone rang an hour later. It was Mark. His voice was back to that syrupy sweet tone he used when he wanted something. "Hi, Mum. Just checking in. How are you feeling after the doctor's visit?" "I'm feeling fine, Mark. I was fine before he came too." The scent of old paper from the folder was still on my fingers. "Good, good," he said quickly. "Listen, I was thinking. Have you given any more thought to letting me help you with your finances? It would be so much easier if my name was on your bank accounts. You know, just in case of an emergency." I stayed silent. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space. "Anyway," he continued, "Susan already scheduled a follow-up for you with a real specialist, a Dr. Evans, just to be safe." The next morning was my weekly coffee hour at the church. The basement smelled of brewed coffee and baked sugar. My friend Carol sat across from me at one of the long folding tables. She pushed the plate of Danish pastries toward me. "You're quiet today, Eleanor," she said, her eyes kind. "Everything all right?" I wanted to tell her. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to tell her how my children had brought a stranger into my home to judge me, but the shame was a physical weight in my chest. It felt too big, too ugly to say out loud. "Just tired," I lied, picking up a pastry. "Didn't sleep well." I took a bite. It tasted like cardboard. I watched Carol chat with another woman about her new grandchild, and I had never felt so alone. My daughter Susan came over on Tuesday. She said it was to help with my mail. She breezed in, smelling of expensive perfume and carrying a stack of plastic sorting trays. The air conditioner hummed softly in the background. She sat at my kitchen table, the one my late husband George had built, and started making little piles. "This is junk," she announced, tossing a catalogue onto the floor. "These are bills." She put the electric bill and the water bill into a red tray. Then she picked up the letter from the Social Security Administration, my monthly statement. She didn't open it. She just looked at it, and then placed it in a new, blue tray. "And this," she said, her voice full of false cheer, "is the pile of things we need to handle for you." She added a letter from my pension fund to her little blue tray. She was taking my money, just not the cash. She was taking the information, the control. While Susan was in the bathroom, I noticed my pen by the phone had run out of ink. I wanted to add milk to my grocery list. My hands were shaking a little, but I told myself it was just from the coffee. I saw her purse sitting on the armchair, big and leather. "I'll just borrow a pen," I whispered to myself, as if someone might hear. I unzipped the main compartment. Inside, among the lipstick and tissues, I saw a small white business card. It said, "Bradley and Howe, attorneys at law." Underneath, in smaller print, it read, "Specializing in elder law and guardianship." My breath caught in my throat. I suddenly understood. The appointment with Dr. Evans wasn't just another checkup. It was a formal assessment, the kind they use in court. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. The refrigerator kicked on with a loud groan that made me jump. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking of George. He always used to say, "Eleanor, you've got a mind like a steel trap. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." I could almost feel the weight of his hand on my shoulder. They weren't just saying I was forgetful. They were trying to erase me. Right then, a feeling started to grow in my stomach. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a cold, hard anger, solid as a river stone. I decided, right there in the dark, that I would not be erased. The next morning, I needed to feel normal. I needed to do something for myself. I drove to the grocery store. The squeak of the cart's wheel was a familiar, comforting sound. I was standing in the checkout line, deciding between oatmeal raisin and chocolate chip cookies, when my phone rang. It was Mark. "Mum, where are you?" he asked. His voice was thick with that fake concern I was starting to hate. "I'm at the grocery store, Mark. I needed milk." There was a pause. The cashier scanned my bread. "Beep?" "Mom," he said, his voice dropping a little. "You really should tell us before you go out, just so we don't worry." It didn't feel like concern. It felt like a leash tightening around my neck. I spent the afternoon in my garden, my one true sanctuary. I pulled weeds from around my rose bushes, the thorns scratching my worn leather gloves. The soil was cool and damp in my hands. It was the only thing that felt real. Then I heard my neighbors, the Hendersons, talking over the back fence. "Did you hear about poor Mrs. Gable down the street?" Betty Henderson said, her voice low. "Her kids put her in that home over on Oak Street, said she wasn't safe by herself anymore." My hands froze in the dirt. I knew I had to fight. I had to fight with everything I had. But sitting there, with the smell of roses all around me, I had no idea how. I remembered a news story I'd seen a while back. A man had caught his business partner cheating him by using a tiny little recorder. The idea sat in my mind like a smooth, cold stone. It felt wrong. It felt sneaky. But what Mark and Susan were doing felt a lot worse. The next morning, I drove to the public library. The air inside smelled of old paper and floor polish. I sat down at a computer in the corner, the hum of the machine a low comfort. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard, but I found what I was looking for. A small, voice-activated recorder, no bigger than a book of matches. I used my credit card to order it, my heart thumping a little too fast. When I checked out my mystery novels, the librarian, a nice young woman named Sarah, smiled at me. "Getting into the online world, Eleanor?" "Just a little," I said, my voice steady. "I'm thinking of recording the bird songs in my garden." It was a silly lie, but it was the first one that came to mind. She just nodded, none the wiser. The recorder arrived 2 days later in a plain brown cardboard box. I sat at my kitchen table and unwrapped it carefully, like it was a bomb. It was so small, a little black rectangle of plastic. I read the instructions twice, then practiced turning it on and off. A tiny red light blinked, then disappeared. It was working. I looked around the room for a hiding place. My eyes landed on the big ceramic fruit bowl George had bought me in Mexico years ago. It was full of fake lemons and apples, and always sat in the middle of the table. I tucked the little device between a plastic pear and a bunch of waxy grapes. You couldn't see it at all. I felt a strange sickness in my stomach, a mix of terror and a flicker of power. Just then, the phone rang. It was Susan. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright and false. "Mark and I were thinking of coming over for dinner tomorrow night. I'll bring a casserole. We really need to sit down and have a proper talk about your future. I made a roast chicken for dinner, the way they always liked it. The house filled with the smell of rosemary and thyme. Just before they arrived, I walked past the kitchen table. My hand trembled as I reached into the fruit bowl and pressed the tiny button. The little red light blinked once. They sat at my table, eating the food I cooked, and planned the end of my life. "The realtor said we could get a good price for the house, even with the market the way it is," Mark said, cutting his chicken. Susan nodded, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "And the facility over in Oak Creek has a wonderful memory care unit. It's clean. They have activities." "Her portfolio is solid," Mark continued, his voice low, as if I were in another room. "Once we liquidate the stocks, that should cover the entrance fee and the first few years." They talked about my things, my money, my home, my mind. They never once looked at me. I just sat there, a ghost at my own table. My children were not planning my care, I thought, the words forming hard and clear in my mind. They were planning my erasure. Late that night, long after they had gone, I took the recorder to my bedroom. The house was silent, except for the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. I plugged in the little earphones that came with it and pressed play. Their voices filled my head. Cold, practical. There was none of the fake concern, none of the gentle sighs. It was just business, the business of getting rid of me. I listened to them discuss my pension and my social security as if it were already theirs. I heard my son, my Mark, say, "It's for the best. She's just becoming a burden." I turned it off, my stomach churning with a nausea so deep it felt like it was coming from my bones. It was the cruelest thing I had ever heard. But it was also evidence. Cold, hard evidence. I put the recorder in my jewelry box, under my late husband's wedding ring. The next morning, I decided to check my bank account online. I always paid my bills that way. It made me feel capable. I sat at my little desk in the sunroom, the light streaming in through the clean windows. I typed in my username and then my password, the one I'd used for 10 years. The website flashed a message in red letters. Incorrect password. I tried again, slowly, carefully. Incorrect password. A knot of ice formed in my chest. I clicked the Forgot Password link. It asked for a security question. What was the name of your first pet? I typed, Buddy. The screen changed. A reset link has been sent to the primary email on file, but I never got an email. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mark. Hi, Mum. Just updated your bank password for better security. I have it if you need anything. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone feeling heavy as a brick in my hand. The morning sun streamed through the window, lighting up dust motes dancing in the air. I stared at the phone number for my friend Carol. My finger hovered over the keypad. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Finally, I took a breath that shuddered and dialed. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor? Is everything all right? The dam broke. The words came out in a torrent, all about Dr. Klein, the guardianship papers, the lawyer's card, and finally the bank password. I just talked and talked, my voice cracking. Carol didn't interrupt. She just listened, the silence on her end a warm, comforting blanket. When I finally ran out of breath, she spoke, her voice hard as steel. That rotten son of a... she started, then caught herself. Eleanor, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. My niece, the one who went through that nasty divorce. Her lawyer was a real shark, a young woman sharp as a tack. Oh, Carol, I don't know, I said, my voice small. There's no I don't know, she snapped, all business. I'm texting you her name and number right now. You call her today. You hear me? My phone buzzed on the table. The lawyer's office was downtown, in one of those new glass buildings that made me feel like a sparrow in a hawk's cage. The air inside smelled of expensive coffee and clean carpets. Ms. Anya Sharma was younger than my granddaughter, with sharp eyes and a handshake that was firm and warm. She led me to a chair that was surprisingly comfortable. Mrs. Davison, she said, her voice calm. Your friend Carol said it was urgent. Please, tell me what's happening. I told her everything, my voice steadier this time. I laid out the sequence of events like I was sorting laundry. When I finished, her expression was unreadable. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small digital recorder. I have this, I said, my hand trembling slightly as I pushed it across the polished wood desk. It's a recording of a dinner I had with my children. She listened to a portion of it through a small earphone, her eyes never leaving my face. I watched a muscle tighten in her jaw as she heard them discuss the value of my house. She finally took the earphone out. This is good, she said, her voice flat. This is very good. But they will say you are confused, that you are manipulating them. I looked down at my worn hands, folded in my lap. They were writing my last chapter, I said, my voice quiet but clear. But I am the one holding the pen. Ms. Sharma looked at me, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a thin, dangerous smile. Yes, you are, she said. This recording is our silver bullet. But a good soldier always has more than one bullet in her gun. We need more. Ms. Sharma told me to look for anything related to my finances, especially informal agreements. Think back, Eleanor, she'd said. Any loans? Any large gifts you documented? Anything with a signature? So I spent my Saturday in the attic. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. A single dusty bulb cast long shadows over stacks of boxes. I opened a trunk that hadn't been touched since my husband George passed. Inside were my old wedding albums, the pages crinkling as I turned them. There was George, so young and handsome in his uniform. There I was, with my children as babies, their tiny hands wrapped around my finger. I could almost feel the phantom weight of them in my arms. For a moment, A wave of grief washed over me, not just for George, but for the family I thought I had. I sat on the dusty floor, surrounded by a lifetime of report cards, holiday photos, and my husband's love letters. It felt like I was digging through a tomb, my own tomb. Sunday morning, I went back up to the attic, armed with a cup of coffee and a new sense of purpose. I started on George's old file boxes, the ones where he kept all the household records. He was meticulous. He had receipts from 1982. Tucked in the back of a drawer, I found his old business ledger, a heavy green book with marbled edges. Its pages smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. I ran my fingers over his neat, slanted handwriting. He'd tracked every penny. Near the back, tucked between pages, was a single sheet of blue-lined paper, folded in half. My heart gave a little thump. I unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten note. The handwriting was not George's. It was Mark's, from 20 years ago, when he was just starting out. It was messy and rushed. It read, "I owe you, Mom, $75,000 for the down payment on the Elm Street property, to be repaid upon request." It was signed, Mark Davison, the Elm Street property. That was the building his business was still in today. I met Ms. Sharma on Monday morning. I didn't even take my coat off. I just walked into her office and laid the single sheet of paper on her desk. She picked it up, her manicured nails a sharp contrast to the faded blue lines. She read it once, then twice. The silence in the room was broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward her copy machine. I nodded. She walked over and made several copies, her movements precise and efficient. The whir and click of the machine was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. She came back and handed me the original. "Keep this somewhere safe," she said. "This changes things, Eleanor. This is a legally recognized debt." She tapped the copy on her desk. "Your son claims you're not competent to manage your money, yet he has owed you a small fortune for 2 decades. She leaned forward, her dark eyes glittering. "Their petition for guardianship is our first problem. We will fight it, and we will win. But this," she said, holding up the paper, "this allows us to formulate the second part of our plan. We are no longer just on the defense. Now, we go on the offense." I went to the dreaded cognitive assessment with Dr. Evans. The office smelled of rubbing alcohol and that faint, dusty scent of old paper files. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Knowing I had a plan felt like a warm blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I sat on the crackly paper of the exam table, my back straight. Dr. Evans was a kind-looking man with tired eyes. He asked me to draw a clock, to name as many animals as I could in 1 minute, to repeat a list of 5 words back to him later. I did it all, my voice calm and clear. I answered his questions about the current date, the season, the mayor. "You're doing very well, Eleanor," he said, making a note on his clipboard. "Well, I've had 72 years of practice," I said, with a small smile. He looked up from his papers and smiled back, a real smile this time. I was performing the role of a perfectly competent woman, and the best part was, it wasn't a performance at all. A week later, a court date was set. Susan brought the papers to my house herself. She didn't call first. She just appeared at my screen door, a thick manila envelope in her hand. The air was heavy with the smell of my neighbor's freshly cut grass. She held the papers out to me, her eyes full of a pity that made my skin crawl. "It's for your own good, Mom," she said, her voice a soft, sticky whisper. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her fingers cold. I took the envelope. The paper felt stiff and important in my hands. I looked her right in the eye, not flinching, not looking away. "We'll see," I said. The surprise that flickered across her face was my first small victory, and it tasted sweeter than any pie I had ever baked. The day of the hearing, I dressed in my navy blue suit, the one I always wore to church on Easter. I put on the small pearl earrings George had given me for our 40th anniversary. In the courtroom, the wooden benches were hard and smelled of old polish. The low hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. Mark and Susan sat at a table with their lawyer, a man with a slick, self-satisfied smile. They wouldn't look at me. Their lawyer stood up. He painted a picture of a confused, forgetful old woman who left the stove on and got lost on her way home from the grocery store. He said I was a danger to myself. I just sat there, my hands folded calmly in my lap, and listened to him erase me. When he was finished, Ms. Sharma stood up. Her voice was crisp and clear. Your Honor, we object, and we have evidence to the contrary. We would like to play a recording. The judge, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, looked surprised. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Proceed, Counselor. Ms. Sharma placed a small digital recorder on the table. She pressed a button. My children's voices filled the silent courtroom, tinny and strange, coming from the tiny speaker. We can sell the house in this market for a fortune, Mark's voice said. The equity alone will cover her first few years. What about the memory care unit? Susan's voice asked. The one in Pine Ridge has a wonderful garden. The courtroom was absolutely still. You could hear the rustle of papers as people shifted in their seats. I watched my son's face go pale, the colour draining from it like water down a sink. Susan just stared at the table and began to cry, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Their lawyer jumped to his feet, flustered. Your Honor, this is an invasion of privacy. This proves she's manipulative, secretly recording her own children who are only trying to help. Ms. Sharma didn't even look at him. She simply placed a document on the judge's bench. Your Honor, this is the official report from Dr. Evans, a court-appointed geriatric specialist. It shows my client, Eleanor Vance, scored in the 98th percentile on her cognitive assessment. Perfectly sound of mind. The judge picked up the report. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she lowered the papers and looked over her glasses at Mark and Susan. It wasn't a look of pity or sympathy. It was a look of pure, undisguised contempt. Ms. Sharma continued, as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of the courtroom. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence of financial mismanagement. She placed a thin stack of papers on the clerk's desk. The air in the room was so still, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. These are my client's bank statements, she said, her voice crisp. You will note a security alert on this date, showing the password was changed. My client did not authorize this change. Her son, Mr. Mark Thompson, did it for her, as he admitted in a text message, effectively locking her out of her own accounts. She paused, letting that sink in. We also have my client's testimony that her daughter, Mrs. Susan Gable, began intercepting her financial mail. Letters from Social Security and her pension fund were taken from her home under the guise of helping. The judge looked from the papers to my children. His expression was like granite. The judge turned his full attention to me. His glasses were perched on the end of his nose. Ma'am, he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. Could you please tell me, in your own words, what you want? I took a deep breath. I could feel the smooth fabric of my best coat under my fingertips. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and clear. I want to continue living in my own home. I want to pay my own bills and decide where my own money goes. I want to drive to the grocery store and see my friends. I looked over at Mark and Susan. They were staring at their hands, folded in their laps. They looked like scolded children. I simply want to live my own life, under my own roof, for as long as I am able. My voice didn't shake once. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at my children, and there was no gentleness left in his eyes. A petition for guardianship is a serious matter, meant to protect the vulnerable, not to control the competent. He looked directly at Mark, then at Susan. What I have seen here today is predatory and shameful behavior. You should be ashamed of yourselves. He picked up his gavel, but didn't bang it. He just held it. This petition is dismissed, with prejudice. That meant they could never, ever try this again. We stood up as the judge left. A wave of relief washed over me so strong my knees felt weak. Mark and Susan were gathering their things, their lawyer whispering urgently to them. As Ms. Sharma and I packed our briefcases, she leaned over to me. The scent of her leather bag was sharp and clean. "Now for phase 2, she said quietly. The very next day, I was in Ms. Sharma's office. The sun streamed through her window, making dust motes dance in the air. She handed me a cup of tea that warmed my hands. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "I've just filed it," she said. It wasn't a defense anymore. It was a separate civil suit, a formal demand for the repayment of a 20-year-old loan, $75,000, plus interest calculated according to state law. The total made my head spin. Attached to the filing was a perfect, clear copy of the IOU I had found in my husband's ledger, with Mark's confident young signature at the bottom. The request was simple: pay the debt. The call came 2 days later. The phone rang so loud it made me jump. I knew it was him before I even picked it up. "What is this?" Mark yelled, his voice crackling with fury. There was no sweet-talking concern now. "Are you trying to ruin me? That was a gift from Dad." I let him shout. I pictured him in his big, important office, his face turning red. I held the phone away from my ear, listening to the noise of it all. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke into the silence. My voice was calm and low. "A gift doesn't come with a signed IOU, Mark." I waited a beat. "Talk to your lawyer," I said. Then, before he could start yelling again, I pressed the button and hung up the phone. The click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. He refused to pay. Ms. Sharma was not surprised. She had a file folder ready on her desk when I came in for our next meeting. The air in her office smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. "He will claim it was a gift, Eleanor," she said, her voice calm and steady. "He will try to bully you." I just nodded. I was past the point of being bullied. "So we file a motion," she continued, tapping a clean, sharp finger on the folder. "We will place a lien on his commercial property, the very one you helped him buy." She explained it in simple terms. He wouldn't be able to sell the building or borrow against it until I was paid in full. It was a legal knot, tied directly to his business, a knot that would only get tighter with time. Ms. Sharma's phone rang, and she excused herself to take the call. I sat there, looking at the papers, and felt a quiet click inside my chest. It was the sound of a lock finally turning. I didn't have to be there, of course. Ms. Sharma handled everything. She called me the next day, right after my morning coffee. A process server, a professional man in a plain suit, had walked into Mark's office building. He delivered the notice of the lien right to Mark at his big desk in front of his employees. I imagined Mark's face, the shock, then the flush of red creeping up his neck. It was not a shouting match. It was not a fight. It was just a piece of paper, delivered quietly, that held his future in its folds. My revenge was not loud. It was official. It was recorded with the county clerk. I was sitting in my favourite armchair, the one George always used, when my phone buzzed on the side table. It was a text from a number I didn't recognise. My heart gave a little jump. I put on my reading glasses to see the tiny words. It said, "Grandma, can we talk? Not about them? Just us." It was from Lucy, my granddaughter. We met at a little coffee shop near the park. The bell over the door tinkled when I walked in. Lucy was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, twisting a paper napkin in her hands. She looked so much like I did at her age. "Grandma?" she said, her voice small. "I am so sorry." I ordered a tea and she ordered a hot chocolate, even though she was 24. The mugs were warm in our hands. She told me she knew her dad and aunt were worried, but she never imagined it was like this. She never knew about the lawyers, the doctors, the court papers. "They talked about selling the house," she whispered, looking down at her cup. "I heard them. I thought they were just talking nonsense." "It wasn't nonsense, dear," I said gently, "but it's over now." We talked for over an hour, about her job, about a boy she was dating, about a book she was reading. It was the first normal conversation I'd had with family in months. It felt like the first crack of light after a long, dark winter. Seeing Lucy made me think hard about the future, not just my future, but hers. The next Monday, I was back in Ms. Sharma's office. The leather on the visitor's chair felt cool and solid. "I want to change my will," I told her. She listened patiently as I laid it all out. Mark and Susan would each receive $1. I wanted it stated clearly in the document. $1, I said, "for the valuable lessons they have taught me about trust and family. The bulk of my estate, the house, the savings George and I worked our whole lives for, would go into a trust. A trust for my grandchildren, Lucy and her brother, to be managed by a professional, a neutral third party. They would not be able to touch it until they were 30. Ms. Sharma nodded slowly, a small smile on her lips. She slid the papers across the desk, and I picked up the heavy pen. My signature was clear and firm. It was the steadiest my hand had been in a year. Ms. Sharma had one more recommendation. "You need a good financial advisor, Eleanor," she said. "Someone who works for you, and only you." The woman she sent me to was named Mrs. Davis. Her office was bright and modern, with a large computer screen on her desk. She didn't talk down to me. She pulled up charts and graphs and explained everything in plain English. For the first time, I saw my entire financial picture, clear as day. The pension, the social security, the investments my husband had so carefully made. "You are in a very strong position, Eleanor," Mrs. Davis said, handing me a printed summary. The paper felt thick and important in my hands. I was wealthier than I had ever realized. I had always let George handle the money, and after he was gone, I just let things be. Seeing it all there, in black and white, made me sit up straighter. A wave of pure competence washed over me. This was mine. I had earned it. I had protected it. And now, I was going to control it. Susan showed up at my door on a Tuesday, right after my morning shows. I saw her through the little peephole, her face all puffy and red. The doorbell rang again, a weak, hesitant sound. I opened the main door, but left the screen door latched. The metal mesh made a pattern across her face. "Mum," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Can I come in? Please?" She said Mark was furious, that he was blaming her for the whole mess, for pushing him into it. She said she was only ever worried about me. I stood there, feeling the cool linoleum of the entryway under my feet. I could smell the rain coming, that heavy, earthy scent in the air. I looked at my daughter, the one who sorted my mail into piles and held my hand while she served me court papers. I didn't feel anger, not anymore. I just felt nothing. A quiet, empty space where all that used to be. "I'm sorry you're having a difficult time," I said. My voice was calm and steady. Then I gently closed the inner door, clicking the lock into place. My friend Carol and I took a trip to the coast the next week. I dipped into my savings and didn't feel a bit guilty. We got a little room with a balcony that looked right out at the ocean. The air smelled of salt and fried shrimp. All day, we heard the sound of the waves and the screeching of the seagulls. We walked on the beach in the mornings, when the sand was still cool and damp. I let the chilly water rush over my ankles. "You seem different, Eleanor," Carol said, holding her sun hat against the breeze. "I think I am," I told her. I watched a sandpiper skitter away from a wave. For months, I had been living with a knot in my stomach, always waiting for the next phone call, the next appointment, the next betrayal. But out here, with the endless grey water in front of me, I realized the waiting was over. The other shoe had already dropped, and I was still standing. When I got home, there was a thick envelope in my mailbox with an official-looking return address. I set my suitcase down in the hall, the wheels still gritty with a bit of sand. I opened the letter with my thumb. The paper was crisp and heavy. It was a notice from the county clerk's office. The lien had been officially recorded. It was done. I sat at my kitchen table and read it twice. It was all legal language, but the meaning was simple. My son's business, the one I helped him start, was now legally tied to me. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't borrow against it. Not until he paid back every single dime. I folded the paper and put it in the drawer with my good silver. The power had shifted, not with a shout, but with a stamp on a piece of paper. The next Monday, I put on a nice blouse and walked down to the public library. I'd seen a sign on their bulletin board, "Volunteers needed." An hour later, I was signed up to help adults learn to read. My first student was a man named Frank, a retired mechanic who wanted to be able to read stories to his grandchildren. "I just get the letters all jumbled up," he told me, his big, calloused hands looking clumsy holding the children's book. "We'll unjumble them," I said, "one word at a time." It felt good to be useful, to be seen as someone with a clear mind who had something to offer. I made friends with the other volunteers, women who knew me only as Eleanor. We'd go for coffee after our shifts and talk about books and politics. They never once asked me what my children did for a living. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was Ms. Sharma. I was just watering my geraniums on the back porch, and the sun felt warm on my arms. "Eleanor, I have good news," she said. Her voice was professional, but I could hear a smile in it. "Mark's lawyer has been in touch. They don't want to fight this anymore." I held my breath. What does that mean? It means they've agreed to a payment plan. He'll be sending a check every month until the principal and the interest are paid in full. She told me the amount. I nearly dropped the phone. It was more than my monthly Social Security check. The son who wanted to control all my money was now legally required to send me his. I decided the family home was too big. It was filled with too many ghosts, and not all of them were friendly. The silence in George's study felt heavy now, and the stairs creaked with memories I was ready to leave behind. I called a realtor, a kind woman named Martha from my church potluck committee. She came over with a folder and a warm smile. "It's a beautiful home, Eleanor," she said, looking at the crown moulding in the living room. "Lots of character." "It's had a lot of characters in it," I said. and we both had a little laugh. We walked through the rooms, the sound of our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. An hour later, a discreet "for sale" sign was hammered into my front lawn. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like shedding a very old, very heavy skin. Mark must have driven by the house. My phone buzzed with a rambling, angry voicemail. His voice was tinny and furious, coming through the little speaker. He wasn't yelling, which was somehow worse. It was a low, tight voice, full of accusations. "You're selling our home," he said. "The home we grew up in. You have no right. You're trying to erase our family's history." I listened to the whole thing without blinking. I thought about the history he was so worried about. The history of him asking for money. The history of his sister rifling through my mail. The history of them bringing a strange doctor into my living room to call me crazy. When the message ended, I pressed the delete button. It was my history, not his. Martha, my realtor, had suggested I look at a new senior community a few towns over. It wasn't a home. It was a collection of beautiful, modern apartments. I went for a tour on a sunny Tuesday. The lobby was bright and smelled faintly of lemons and coffee, not stale air and disinfectant. The director showed me a corner unit on the third floor. It had a small kitchen with new appliances and a balcony that overlooked a rose garden. "The gardening club meets on Tuesdays," she said with a smile. "They're a very active group." I stood on the balcony, feeling the breeze. This wasn't a place I was being sent to. This was a place I was choosing. Before I left, I wrote a check for the deposit. It felt like the sanest thing I had done all year. The house sold in less than a week. A young couple offered more than the asking price. I sat in Ms. Sharma's office and signed the papers. The pen felt steady in my hand. The profit from the sale went directly into the new investment accounts my financial advisor had set up for me. Safe, secure, mine. That evening, Martha called. "Eleanor, I have wonderful news," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I just spoke with the buyers. They are so excited. They have 2 little children." She paused, then added, "They told me they can't wait to fill the house with laughter." I smiled. That was a good ending for the house. Now it was time for my new beginning. Downsizing a lifetime is a strange task. Every teacup, every photograph, every dusty book held a story. I called my granddaughter, Lucy, and asked her to come over. "Take anything you want," I told her, gesturing to the boxes stacked in the living room. "Anything that holds a good memory for you." She picked up the old wooden music box my George had given me. "I always loved this," she said softly, her fingers tracing the carved lid. We spent the whole afternoon like that. I told her the story of the chipped gravy boat and the Afghan draped over the armchair. It wasn't about dividing up possessions. It was about passing down the stories that mattered, the ones worth keeping. Moving day arrived on a bright, sunny Tuesday. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. My friends from the church and the library came to help. Carol brought donuts and coffee in a big thermos that smelled like cinnamon. The men from the moving company were strong and careful with my boxes. We worked all day, a cheerful team. Laughter echoed in the empty rooms where silence had lived for so long. "Eleanor, you're the most organized woman I know," my friend Martha said, looking at my neatly labeled boxes. I just smiled. Organization had become my armor. That evening, with the truck gone and my new apartment mostly set up, I ordered pizza for everyone. We sat on the floor of my new living room, eating from paper plates. The air hummed with the quiet whir of the central air conditioning. I gave the movers $100 tip each. The look of surprise on their faces was worth every penny. When the last friend had gone home, I stood at my new window, looking out at the manicured lawns. This was mine. I had done this. My first night in the new apartment was so quiet. It wasn't the heavy, lonely quiet of the old house. It was a peaceful, clean silence. I made a cup of chamomile tea and took it out onto my little balcony. The air was cool and smelled of cut grass and roses from the community garden below. I pulled a soft afghan my mother had knitted over my legs. The yarn was a little scratchy, a familiar comfort. No creaks from the old house. No memories in every corner. I wasn't listening for a key in the lock or a car in the driveway. I didn't have to worry about who might show up unannounced. For the first time in over a year, I felt completely, utterly safe. I took a deep breath and realized I hadn't been breathing properly for months. The next week, I saw a notice for the gardening club. I walked over to the community greenhouse, my hands tucked in my pockets. A group of women were gathered around a table, repotting orchids. They were laughing about something one of them had said. "Hello," I said, my voice a little shy. "Is this the gardening club?" A woman with a wonderful smile and dirt on her cheek looked up. "It is. I'm Helen. Grab a pot." They didn't ask about my children or my late husband. They asked what I was reading. We talked about a new movie, about the price of groceries, about a trip one of them was planning to Italy. It felt so good to just be Eleanor, a woman who liked to get her hands in the soil. I left that afternoon with a small geranium in a clay pot and 3 new friends. The first check from Mark arrived in the mail a few weeks later. It came in a plain white envelope, addressed in his familiar, sloppy handwriting. My name, Eleanor Vance. No, Mom. I didn't feel angry or sad. I just felt nothing. It was a business transaction. I took out my smartphone, the one my granddaughter Lucy had helped me set up. I opened the banking app, laid the check on my new granite countertop, and took a picture of the front and back. The phone made a little click sound. A green check mark appeared on the screen. "Deposit successful," it read. The simple, modern act felt like a final answer to their claims of my incompetence. I tore the paper check into 4 neat squares and dropped them in the trash. The money was just a number on a screen now, and it was all mine. That afternoon, Carol came over for iced tea. We sat on my balcony, the little red geranium I'd potted now in full bloom between us. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked, nodding toward the kitchen where I'd deposited the check. An idea, bold and bright, popped into my head. "I'm going to spend it," I said. I opened my laptop and typed Alaska cruises into the search bar. Pictures of blue glaciers and breaching whales filled the screen. "Carol," I said, my heart beating a little faster, "how do you feel about seeing the northern lights?" Her eyes widened. "Eleanor, are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life," I told her. I clicked the button to book 2 tickets for a 7-day cruise leaving in September. I paid for it right then and there. After I got the confirmation email, I took a screenshot and posted it on my new Facebook page. I didn't add any words. I just let the picture do the talking. My new life fell into a rhythm, as comfortable as my favorite old sweater. I woke up when the sun told me to, not when an alarm clock screamed. My morning walk took me past the rose garden, where the air was always sweet. I'd have coffee with the ladies from the book club, and we'd talk about the story, not our aches and pains. My days were full, and they were mine. There was a quietness in my head that I hadn't realized was missing for years. For whole stretches of time, days even, I didn't think about Mark or Susan at all. And when I did, it was like remembering characters from a book I'd finished long ago. Lucy visited me every Tuesday after she finished her classes. She'd bring a lemon loaf from a little bakery she liked, and we'd sit on my balcony. The hum of the lawnmowers below was a peaceful sound. She helped me set up a new Facebook page so I could see pictures of her dog. Dad called, she said one afternoon, not looking at me, just focusing on peeling her orange. He was complaining about the payment? I imagine he was, I said, sipping my tea. She looked up, her eyes clear and direct. I told him it was the price he paid for being a bad son, and then I told him not to talk to me about it again. She tossed a piece of orange peel into a little bowl. I saw my own spine, my own strength, sitting right there in that lovely young woman. It was the best inheritance I could ever give her. A letter arrived one morning. The envelope was cheap, thin paper, and I recognized Susan's looping, dramatic handwriting. I almost threw it away, unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. I slit it open with my butter knife. It was 5 pages long, front and back, full of excuses. She was so worried about me. Mark had pressured her. She didn't understand the legal papers. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. She missed her mother. I read the first page and a half, then I stopped. The words were just noise, like static from a radio station that had gone off the air. I walked over to the little shredder I kept by my desk and fed the pages into it, one by one. The machine whined, chewing up her slanted words and turning them into meaningless strips of paper. My forgiveness was not a prize she could win back with a sad story. Carol and I stood on the balcony of our cruise ship cabin, wrapped in thick blankets against the chill. The air smelled clean and sharp, like ice and salt. A massive wall of blue-white ice, a glacier, loomed in the distance. A piece of it broke off and fell into the sea with a sound like thunder. It was the most beautiful, powerful thing I had ever seen. Carol raised her plastic glass of wine. "To new beginnings, Eleanor," she said, her cheeks pink from the cold. I clinked my glass against hers. The cheap plastic made a dull little thud. "To knowing your own worth," I replied, and I took a long, slow sip. The wine was cold and perfect. I was back home, sitting on my balcony in the warm afternoon sun. My potted geraniums were a brilliant, shouting red. The monthly payment from my son had already been deposited into my account. Lucy was coming for dinner, and I had a chicken roasting in the oven, filling my small apartment with the smell of rosemary and thyme. I felt the sun on my face, a gentle, steady warmth. I was not just a survivor. I am the architect of my own peace.